All right, today is Monday, June 30th, and we've got four major topics to cover for this week's episode. The first one is going to be an actual SMB threat report for 2025. So if you own a small business, you have friends that have a small business, or you work for a small business, we're going to talk about some of the top things that threat actors are doing to compromise those businesses and maybe things that you should be aware of. The second story actually ties to that because it's a story about someone who is doing unethical hacking in a lot of ways discussed in the SMB Threat Report. So we're going to talk about that story. The third one is if you're a criminal and you think you're going to get away by accepting Monero or transacting with it, there's so much information out there. It's not as safe as you might think. So we're going to talk about that story. And then the last one is if your business uses any third-party applications for communication, what you should know, because the U.S. House is officially banning certain applications for communication that are not approved. So we're going to get into that and the privacy concerns around third-party applications for communication.
All right. This is the DTF Cyber Podcast. I'm Damien.
This is Troy.
And it's your boy, Ferd. Let's go. Straight into the SMB Threat Report. And so this one's pretty interesting to me because there's a lot of things that it talks about that I'm very familiar with. So I'll give you the first ones. Zoom, Office applications, so Outlook, PowerPoint, ChatGPT.
But I think the article is really just, applications that some of these organizations are looking for, but they're not actually getting what they're looking for, right? They may be installing malware. Is that right?
Yeah. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but I think I saw it a lot across my past roles too, was where, okay, as an example, my employee wants to download Zoom. They go to Google, type in Zoom, and they have this list of results. And the top one's probably official Zoom and maybe an ad for Zoom. The second and third might be a link to a thing that looks like Zoom, but it's actually a malware-laden, rewrapped package of the Zoom application plus some malware. So I think that's kind of what I was reading from that article, but we see this all the time. We're just, going out and searching for those applications, then not really official one, downloading malware in that package.
Yeah. And I think this is a concern for a lot of SMB because they typically don't have packages hosted on an intranet or somewhere they can go and grab them locally within a system that's already pre-vetted. And so you have these employees going out there looking for their own packages, and that's probably where the problem starts.
Yeah. And I think it also ties in, we talked about admin privileges, right? So some of these applications you can deploy yourself right in the browser without admin creds, but in some cases you have that over provisioning of user rights, and they're able to actually install things because the IT admins want to make it easy and make it comfortable, but all of a sudden now they're actually installing pretty significant malware onto the machine.
Yeah, I think so. The way I'm used to doing it, obviously, is pushing it out using some sort of device management where you can push packages to those devices. Typically, users should put in a ticket, ask IT for these applications to be installed, something like Zoom or Microsoft tools, and then IT can just push them. Or a self-service portal that sits within the intranet where you can click on the applications you want to have installed, and it just automatically deploys the right package. I think a lot of those solutions will probably help a lot of employees not go to the internet, download some random package that they think is Zoom, and then having, if they have local admin rights to install it, right? But hopefully they don't have the rights to install brand new packages because that opens up a whole new can of worms.
Yeah. So as I kind of go through the article, some of the things that really stick out to me is like a lot of these common applications that businesses would use, right? So Office, Zoom, GPTs, ChatGPT in particular. So they have all these numbers on the percentages of uptick from the past year. But, the first thing that I'd maybe think of is this, since it's really targeted towards SMBs, and Damon and Troy, most of your experience is within the enterprise, 1,000 users plus, probably 5,000 plus, and so on and so forth. There's a different level of maturity between those organizations and a small business that might have 100 people or less. So I think specifically, maybe my question then is, when it comes to a user downloading applications, is it on the business to provide like an SOP, or rely that their employees are going to understand the risk? Because I don't think most people in any department outside of security, or maybe even technology departments, would really understand the risk of clicking a link and trying to get what they're, download what they're trying to get. Whereas everyone in maybe technology and security would know, ideally know better. So is this just more of an issue of SOPs and things that the businesses should put in place if they're not as mature as having some of these more strict guidelines like what you guys are used to?
Yeah, I think in 2015, Shannon, my wife, and I started a company called Axiom Cyber. So we were an MSSP that handled clients with 5 employees all the way up to 500. So I actually run the small business cybersecurity forum on LinkedIn as well. So really want to stay tuned into what I feel like is like the most vulnerable population of our businesses. As you mentioned, Fern, large enterprise has millions of dollars to spend on defenses, where small businesses are, sometimes deciding whether they pay their staff or they get, cybersecurity tools and services. And so that is a big time education play, and also, making sure that they're making the right choices. There are basic block and tackling that I think every small business should be investing in. And some of those things are, having a good firewall, having good endpoint detection and response tools on your endpoints to control what your employees can put on or not. And especially employee awareness and training. And I can't underestimate that one, because I can't overstate it, because it's so important as a small business. Your employees are your kind of like lifeline, and you need to make sure that they're even more prepared for cyber threats and education. And I would say at a larger enterprise that have more controls if the employees fail. So I think those are the basic, there's a whole list of things, but those are the top 3, in my opinion, that small businesses should invest in for cybersecurity at a minimum.
Yeah, and I think, Troy, that awareness only goes so far. That's the problem. We've seen this with phishing tests and phishing campaigns, where we're still getting anywhere from 5 to 10% click rate on these tests. And it only takes one, right? It only takes one person to click on something malicious that explodes into something more impactful to the business. And so starting with the awareness, I think, is a good example, but there needs to be guidelines or guardrails around the activities of the users, so that they don't accidentally think that they're doing something good because maybe you're bypassing IT, or maybe you don't even have an IT department. You're just going out there to try to download some productivity tools and then using those to install them locally. But it turns out you're not installing the right package, and maybe there's some malware packaged in there. Or, as we've talked about in previous podcasts, the ability for users to go out there and look for maybe cheaper versions of software or free versions of software, which may not necessarily be free, right? They're packaged malware that's feeding information back to these developers.
That's right. And, sometimes it's not about, what's inside that package. It may be malicious, but it's definitely a spyware. You could be siphoning off intellectual property. You could be getting them remote access later in the game. So definitely want to do that. And the value proposition for managed services in a small business is so high, because you're not going to be able to afford to hire top tier cyber talent. You're certainly not going to be able to build out a cybersecurity team. And so the value of, finding a true partner, and there's been this whole wellspring of MDR services popping up, managed detection and response, where they actually put in something like a SentinelOne, a CrowdStrike, or another EDR, and they manage it for you 24/7. So this is kind of a force multiplier for small business. And so, depending on where you are in your journey, how many employees you have, definitely want to look for that right partner who's going to bring in technology, because we all know, and honestly, Proofpoint's annual average click rate is 12%. Overall, averaging everything out, 12%. So that means 12 people out of 100 are going to click that link, and it's going to bring stuff into your business you don't want. They're going to download things, as this report highlighted. They're going to download things that are not appropriate. So having a managed service, having a trusted partner that can come up with some plans for you is important. And then, Damien, as you mentioned, policy is important. Making sure employees understand what's right, what's wrong, set of use policies, clean desk policies, everything down the line, so that these employees are fully aware of what they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And that clarity will bring trust.
So, Fern, do you see a lot of customers pushing back on this because they don't want to spend money on security, or they seem like they can't spend money on security?
I think it's a mix. And I think it honestly depends on the organization. I would say in my experience, the larger organizations, they have entire teams of people that are dedicated to, certain roles and certain responsibilities. And whether that's within a SOC, whether that's their network security, whether that's their architecture and things like that, it's very kind of like broken into swim lanes. So you see a lot of people kind of handling certain responsibilities, but as you get lower in the employee account, typically, I want to say like the security department's maybe like 1 to 2% of the total population of an organization. So when you think about like a 500-person organization, or at least in the technology space, right? A percentage of the employees. So as you get like to 100 employees or 500 employees, you only have a handful of people. Whereas when you're in the enterprise space, you might have 50 people working in security. That same, um, a similar company that is a fraction of the size might have 2 people. And the IT leader, the IT director, might be the IT manager, who might happen to be the security person as well. And I think that's where, like Troy said, a lot of times those companies rely on the MSSPs to help either augment what they're doing through some sort of like staff aug, or even like a service, right?
I think that does get expensive though, right? I think that's part of the challenge. I let me make a recommendation. I think there's a lot of local colleges or universities that may have a fusion center that they're trying to teach their students on how to manage security operations. And they may offer it up to small businesses where they can monitor your systems for you or come in and do an assessment as part of their education. And I think that might be a more economical approach where you don't have to go out there and, if you can't afford to hire a traditional MSSP, this might be a solution for you. So I would call around and see if that's even possible.
Yeah, and I've heard some stories of some organizations like at the state level that are using college students to run their SOC, like level 1 SOC. I think it's like,
Well, it's built into the school program. That's what I'm saying, right? I think there may be a curriculum that has like a university SOC that provides services to the community for these small businesses.
Okay, I hadn't heard of that, but I would imagine if you're looking for someone to help, reaching out to a handful of people locally would probably get really strong results. Like I know Mike is always pointing people in the right direction if they're looking for help. So Mike Manrod out of Grand Canyon, he's always part of a conversation when it comes to helping the community. So he might be one of the best people to reach out to, obviously in the Phoenix area, the Arizona market. And there's a handful of others as well. I don't necessarily want to name names and have people get phone calls.
No, but I think CISA also has some resources for small business. They have a whole section for tools that you can use for free and other services. So if you are familiar with the Critical Infrastructure Security Agency or CISA under the Department of Homeland Security, they have some outreach programs.
Yeah, well, what were you gonna say, Damon? You're gonna jump in and say something too.
No, I mean, I think that's that's the path to take. I know you mentioned Mike Manrod at Grand Canyon University. He has a great program, even actually educational programs here in Arizona. So I think that's a good option. But if you could reach out to us, like I've got connections across the country for different universities. I'm not sure if they all run in the similar fashion, but some of them do have students that are looking for experience. And so if you are a small business and you need, an easy security assessment where a student needs to go through that work anyways for their projects, it might be an option, right? Especially for companies that are really small, like sub 100 employees. You don't even have your own IT person. This might make sense to just reach out to the community.
Yeah, and here in Vegas, they have a thing called Tech Impact. I think they're across some other cities, but Tech Impact takes people who are transitioning into technology from outside roles, different jobs, and they get training, certifications, and then they end that with getting internships in companies in the small business space as well. So look for programs like that, or trying to help people get their foot in the door as a paid internship, but that paid internship is much more affordable than hiring a technology person right out the gate. So I've seen that be very successful in turning those folks into good parts of a long-term full-time employee role.
Yeah, and if you are a cyber student, it doesn't hurt to, reach out to some of the nonprofits locally and offer help, right? You can go to your local church, for example. They may have computer systems. You could probably do some volunteer work there. You know what, Fern? I'll tell you what not to do.
What's that?
Hack into their system and try to sell them your services.
That's for sure.
Yeah, no, that's kind of going to the next article. I will say before we jump into the next one, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it's fairly well, I say well known, at least locally. So Grand Canyon is building something that they're calling Overclock. I'm gonna tell you what it is. It's essentially a dorm built for students to just hack the entire day. So think of it like a I don't even know what the right phrase is, but if you could live on campus and in a dorm that's specifically designed for you to hack into different areas of it as practice and by design, by the time you go from freshman to senior, you've essentially gotten 4 years of experience living in a dorm where it's hacking 24/7. And
what I love about that, Fern, is that it's an open world hacking challenge. So, if you've ever played capture the flag, or if you've gone into some of these hack the box type of exercises, this is the real world example of that, where you're actually physically living in a place where you're, supposed to hack. So you can do physical attacks, you can do Wi-Fi attacks, you can do all the things that you can't do across the interwebs into some server that's foreign. So what I love about that is there's different levels as well, Fern. So level 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on how your skill level is. And, the folks that get to that top tier and who actually capture that flag get a special jacket to wear around campus to show that they've completed that challenge. It's very rare. So those folks are looked at with high esteem on campus.
And it sounds like you're living in a video game, real life video game.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I think it's set to go live September 1st. Is from my understanding and talking with Mike was, at least this was like a month ago, was they're trying to have it done and prepared by September 1st. So if you're a student or if you're looking to go to college and you want to focus on security, you happen to live in Arizona, or maybe you don't, but you're willing to move to Arizona, I think Grand Canyon is kind of setting a precedent for a lot of students to get the exposure and real world experience while they're still in college without having to graduate and then try and find a job and realize that it's a lot more difficult than a lot of people would have realized. So this is a really good way to get that experience, get the exposure, meet a lot of people, real world experience, and then, like you said, Troy, get a badass coat.
So many universities that have cyber ranges. This is raising the bar with a physical cyber range with real life rewards. It's like living in a Minecraft game and hacking all day and all night in your physical world. It's crazy. I hope this becomes a standard. I hope other universities see this and gravitate towards this type of education, because nothing is better than real world hands-on experience with the right tools, being able to do what you're going to do in the field once you graduate.
Yeah, we'll put a link to Grand Canyon University. They do have a really good cyber program. And, we'll also drop Mike Manrod's LinkedIn. You can reach out and connect to him.
Yeah, he's literally a stalwart in the industry, always willing to help mentor folks and, provide knowledge. I've seen him on panel discussions. He's always in the community helping out. This guy's a legend.
Yes, he's a living legend. Actually, Mike is one of the main reasons why I have this podcast studio, right? So we had met and he kind of encouraged me that I should start podcasting, or at least get into it. And that's where this whole thing started. So without Mike, there would be no DTF. But there might be DTF. Very unlikely.
I think we need to bring him on as our first guest. I think we had held off. This is episode 10. We said let's get through 10 episodes first.
Yeah.
Maybe we can bring him on as the next guest.
Well,
first guest.
Here's the secret. We can't ask him to come on. He has to let us know that he knows the secret phrase, which is Angels Envy Whiskey. And the only way he knows that is by listening to this episode, because he has to have listened to the episode to hear the code word. So if he doesn't know the code word and you hear it, anyone listening hears it, you can't tell Mike the code word. Just know that he has to listen on his own. And then he'll come to us with the phrase Angels Envy Whiskey, which is what's in my cup right now. And we'll bring him on. So it's like a little Easter egg in the episode. But we'll get to the next topic, right? And so we talked about how the SMB Threat Report has all these things. They talked about trusted relationships, right? So third-party risk was part of that. Malicious files, PUAs, and a few other things. So we didn't really get too much into those. But in this next article is a really good example of how someone is using their prowess in the security world to earn a living. And specifically what I mean by that is there was a gentleman, I think he was 32, that was using hacking as a means to pay for his dinners, to cover his bills. And specifically, what I mean is he was hacking into local businesses, doing things to his benefit, and then on the back end of that, offering them services. So think of it like a windshield repair company throwing rocks on the highway and just having trucks drive over these rocks. And every single car gets shattered windshields. And every exit, you see a big billboard for need a new windshield. And you're like, oh man, like I need a windshield. So the equivalent of that, of doing things maliciously, and then coming up and showing up and saying, hey, I can help you, is what this person was doing. So I'll say that, and then I'll let Damon, you take it from there.
I mean, we've been talking about ethical hacking, or in this case, unethical hacking. It's obviously not the way to do it. If you wanted to sell them services, he should not have broken his way in, even though if the door is open, right? If the door is left open for him, don't just walk through, and start spray painting the walls to say, I was here, and then contacting the homeowner to say, hey, I can fix your door lock. It's just not the way to go about it. I think in this case, he did take some data, he changed data. So he wasn't just in there lurking, he was actually doing stuff with this data and then turning around to sell them services to protect their systems. So I think this is the way you go about it. If you are, a bug bounty hunter where you're looking for vulnerabilities, the one thing you want to be careful of is to not exploit them to the point where you're taking advantage of that system. You have to be able to report it in a timely fashion, and also make sure you do that confidentially so that nobody else could take advantage of the vulnerabilities. I've seen a lot of bug hunters submit reports. Sometimes they're great. Sometimes they're just, making guesses. So bug bounty programs are definitely helpful for programs. If you're developing a software product and you want to know where your bugs are, a bug bounty program is great. But if you're looking to try to capitalize that on the other side, just be careful, right? Don't enter into any networks that you shouldn't be into, and just be careful what you do while you're in there.
Yes, it's so funny because if you think about it, this is a guy who makes his living being an IT guy, right? And to drum up business, he goes and he hacks people, and then he says, "Well, I can offer you my services to fix the things that I broke." I don't know if he told the people he broke them up, but as a detective in the early 2000s, I had a case just like this. Had a restaurant in town. They were having cyber problems, and they finally got a bit suspicious after about the fifth time they had to call this guy. Basically, there was an issue with their network and their cameras and their registers, and every time the thing wouldn't work, they would call this guy out for a service fee, $300 to $500 a pop, and it would work for a week and then it would stop working again. They finally got suspicious. We looked at it, and what we saw was this guy was going in about the 6th or 7th day and changing settings again so that it would break, and they would give him a service call, and he would come in and make another $300 to $500. And so we were able to finally kind of set up a trap, watch him do it, record the actions, and then we were able to get a conviction on that. He lost his job, lost his licensing, lost his, his business for $500. It's ridiculous what people will do to make money. But if you have, as Damien said, if you have a business, if you're an IT person, you have kind of an ethical, Hippocratic oath to your clients to do only good, no harm. And I just, it's ridiculous people take advantage. To your point on the bug bounty, there's such a gray line between vendors who try to skate that line very closely and say, look at all these bad things we saw on your external attack surface. If you pay us money, we can give you this full report and you can go remediate. Anytime I get a sales pitch like that as a CISO, it's always like nails on a chalkboard because I feel like it's the sleazy car salesman approach. Are you going to provide me real value as a vendor, or are you going to, hold me over the coals of something I may or may not actually have a problem with? And so 99% of the time, I did not do business with those folks. So, again, in cybersecurity and in life in general, trust is epic, right? Trust is paramount. You want to make sure that you are coming in with integrity and honesty and transparency so that your customers get that good feeling. You will create a lifelong relationship that's going to pay in spades, far, far beyond $500.
Yeah, I think this guy is facing, I think it says 5 years, up to 5 years in jail.
Yeah. And
So it is quite serious, right? I think he did a lot more. I think in the article, it also said that he may have changed his gym membership. So he taken advantage of the situation prior to trying to pitch them his services. But yeah, there's a fine line there. If you're a pen tester, I'll say this is a story from years ago. We had hired a pen testing company to pen test our organization, and they had a certain get out of jail free card. So you want to make sure you have coverage and you have at least a piece of paper that says you're allowed to do this hacking if you're a pen tester. And if you go beyond that, you are probably breaking the rules and you're probably doing something illegal. I did hire a pen tester. I want to say this is probably about 15 years ago now, where their scope of work was to do red teaming against the systems. There at no time did it say that they had authorization to do physical hacking. And sure enough, these guys started to do the physical aspect of it. They were caught in one of our facilities, and obviously there were charges laid, trespassing charges, because they did not have authorization. The local physical security team did not know about them, did not know they were coming. And then when they came back to us within our team in IT, it was not known to us that this person was even an approved pen tester for the same company that we had hired. And so there's a lot of confusion. And the physical security piece of it was not in scope. And so if you're going to be a pen tester or your company's sending you out to do a pen test against a client, make sure you have documentation to say that you are authorized to do that work.
Yeah. Did you hear about the two pen testers that were arrested in the courthouse? Very similar. I think one of the county administrators had hired them to do a pen test, and they did not have authorization. They actually broke into the courthouse at night and were arrested. And they were like, "Oh no, we're with this company and we're doing the pen test and so on." They spent almost 30 days in jail. It was a really serious crime. And I think that they still had to go to court. And I'm not sure if they were found guilty or what happened in the outcome. But they had a big problem for a long time. It's not, very easy. And this was one of the very well known, if I said the name, you would know it, companies. So imagine these smaller firms that do red teaming or pen testing. You have got to properly define your scope and get that written authorization for what you're going to do. And there's also, Damien, I'm sure in these pen test agreements, there's a don't touch production, you don't cause any outages. If you find something, you must stop. I mean, there's so many things that are, key components of a good red teaming agreement. You need to be very clear so that there's no misunderstanding about where those boundaries are.
Yeah, those agreements are super important. In this case, this guy did not have any agreements. He kind of just took it upon himself to go and do this. And, that's kind of scary that, that people are out there trying to hack you in the first place, but somebody who's doing it then on the back end trying to gain your trust. You've already lost trust. You're already broken into our systems. I don't know if you could be trusted at that point.
Who goes for extra credit though? Like that to me seems ridiculous. So like you're hired to do a job and it almost feels like a bully where you just kind of push the limits or the phrase you give them an inch and they want a mile or they take a mile, where it's like, hey, we're paying you, we're basically compensating you to do these tasks, and then you take it upon yourself to almost like go above and beyond, just to be able to prove that you can do it. And I think maybe that's more of a personality trait, if anything, where certain people kind of like to push the envelope. And maybe that's a great person to have in a pen testing role, just not necessarily someone that's doing work for someone else, right? Maybe if your company hires you to do it and you do it internally, that's great because you can kind of push the envelope. But if someone's paying you, right, I don't think you have free reign to do whatever you want, right? And that's kind of what you guys are saying is that there should be limitations, and if you get to a certain point where things can break, you should always turn back and document it, and then let
Well,
everyone.
there's always limitations. Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it from this angle, there are mission critical, life impacting systems, and if you're involved with one of those and you accidentally take one down, you could impact human life, which is quite critical. And so, even if you're approved to be engaged, you still need to be extremely, extremely careful. Your mission isn't to go and take down systems. It's to try to find these weaknesses and hopefully allow the company to fix them. That's your job, right? So even if you're being paid, just be careful. I know that there's a certification. I don't know, Troy, if you've looked at the CEH. Yep, Certified Ethical Hacker. I've had my employees go through it. I haven't personally looked at the class, but I heard it's a popular one.
So well worth it. Absolutely. It's a good certification, especially, I don't want to say entry level. It's not an entry level cert, but it's definitely one of the earlier certs that people get to help progress in their career, especially in the SOC. It's great. And it's great because it gives you that foresight into the offensive side, right? You know, a lot of times we come up through the ranks as the defenders and we're the blue team and we're just always on the defensive. The certified ethical hacker gives you that lens from the attacker's perspective. How do they do reconnaissance? What are the first things they do to try to break in? What kind of malware do they use? What tactics do they use? So I highly recommend it for anybody in security operations, anybody looking to get into, red teaming or pen testing, which is a fun field. But, again, you have to be careful and have your boundaries, just like any football game. You can't, go out of bounds, and that's, you get penalized.
Well, ethical is in the title. So hopefully they cover ethics in that class.
Absolutely. And I got one more story before we leave this subject because it kind of fits. I read an article today, as a matter of fact, on ethical/unethical hacking. 17-year-old kid from Ohio hacks into his local traffic grid and optimizes the traffic flow. He was so tired of his bus being stuck in traffic, he hacks in using a Raspberry Pi and a decommissioned laptop from his school, and he hacks in and he makes traffic better. He improved 5 major traffic intersections. He still got charged. I mean, it is, unauthorized access to a government network, unauthorized access to critical infrastructure. He actually got fined and he's on house arrest. But one of the traffic engineers, anonymously, he couldn't say his name, but he anonymously told the article, it's like his stuff was better than anything we have. So he actually optimized traffic. It was good. He was doing the right thing, but he still got charged and he still got found guilty, house arrest. So, I appreciate his, enthusiasm. Somebody's going to have to give this kid a job when he gets done, right? He's great, but you've got to go about it the right way. Make sure you're not doing that illegal or unauthorized access.
So interesting. I did interview somebody for a position years ago now, and he said, I noticed there was a gap in his experience, like a couple of years, and I didn't really ask him about it, but he was very forward. He said, oh, you may notice that there's a 2-year gap. That's because I was in jail for hacking, and he wore that as a badge of honor. I didn't see it as a badge of honor, right? It's interesting though that he thought that was, let me draw attention to this. It'll probably make me more, appealing. And I'd like to hear your input on that, Troy. If somebody said, "Hey, you see my 2-year gap? That's because I was arrested for hacking. You didn't hire me."
Well, one of my favorite people is reformed hacker Alyssa Knight, a good friend of ours. And she, was a reformed hacker turned, government asset. And she now runs a production company, Hollywood studio, and all this other stuff. And she's hacked so many major banks and come back to the world as a good, API hacker. And she did scorched earth and so many great things. So, I think absolutely a lot of people in our industry have come from that side of the fence where they started as a kid with a lot of curiosity and a lot of capability, and they found things that they exploited. And, it's kind of how I got involved in cyber. Thankfully, never did anything to cross that line, but I was always curious and always looking for ways to, take advantage of of devices and of computer systems and servers. And then when I got in the State Department, we learned really how to do that at scale. So that was fun. And I think there's a lot of allure to that.
There is, but my answer to him was, or question to him was, well, if you're so good, why did you get caught?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm not advocating anybody here to go hack something you should not hack. That's illegal or unauthorized. It's not a way to get a job. Don't say, I'm going to go hack this government system so I can get a job at the NSA. I think we are well past those years. If you think about the journey of cybersecurity industry in general, we were a lot more open to that earlier when there was no talent and some of these people were rock stars, right? We said, we need you to come, do this for us because you're the best at it. Now the talent pool is immense and there's so many great talent and people out there that if you're a hacker and can hack, the latest encryption code or something like that, you might be a one of one. That's one thing, but there are so many people, I wouldn't risk it.
Yeah, but sometimes the ones that get caught or the ones that are hacking today, they're not truly pen testing. They're like script kiddies. They find something on the internet, they run it, they get lucky, so those are some of the things.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. In fact, some of the tools that they use make it so easy. It goes back to Shannon's book. We talked about Shannon's book last week. Is AI making us dumb, right? You're able to put a chat into ChatGPT and ask it, how do I exploit this vulnerability? It gives you 10 steps. How much actual critical thinking and struggle did you have to do to figure that out? Not much. And so I think that it's so important that we remember that AI is great to help us understand how to do the attack, but it doesn't tell us the struggle of why that works and what exactly you're accomplishing by what you're doing. And also doesn't tell you the potential pitfalls of what you're doing either.
Yeah, you're just getting lucky, right?
We're gonna have a link for that book, right? We're gonna have
That's right.
I guess we were gonna have it for the last episode 9, so we threw it on there. So we're gonna throw it on there again for this week's episode. So I guess kind of like a random question is, so Marcus Hutchins, similar situation, right? I don't think he actually did prison time, or did he?
Yeah, he was actually arrested here in Vegas when he got off the plane to go to Black Hat. But Marcus Hutchins, for those who don't know, is the programmer who actually did the kill switch for the WannaCry spread, the NotPetya, that was heading across, Ukraine and Eastern Europe and heading into Western Europe. Basically, it was a malware that was looking to see if a domain was active, and if it was not active, then it would continue. If it was active, then it would die. That was to prevent, if the URL was active, that means somebody had found out about it. It's called the kill switch. So Marcus went out and he registered that domain, made it live, and that's what stopped the NotPetya from spreading around the world, the WannaCry. So he was kind of famous, but he had also been on the wanted list at that time for something else he did. So, even though he saved the world, so to speak, on that one, he didn't, get out of getting in trouble, getting arrested as soon as he touched U.S. soil and having to go to court. I do not know if he was convicted or what his status is. I do know that he is doing a lot of industry discussions. He's at Black Hat RSA and all things like that. So he's definitely in the community now, but, he's not, I'm not sure what the outcome was.
If you're going to break the law, do something good before you convert and hope that they don't charge you with all the other stuff, right? I always see him on LinkedIn posting stuff, and he's got really interesting topics that he's always talking about. And a lot of it's around current events and things like that. So I figured I'd ask because I hadn't been aware of him maybe 6 months ago, right? So he kind of came up, and when I hear about this person that had the 2-year sentence where wasn't working, with Damien's interview, it reminded me of Marcus. So I figured I'd ask because just curious, right? Okay. Well, I guess to me, it seems like there's a lot of bad actors out there. And if there's one way or there's one incentive that they have, it always comes down to money, right? It always comes down to how they're going to get paid. And typically they're not doing these things for free or for fun, at least I would imagine. Maybe part of it is fun, but the monetary incentive always exists. But that kind of takes us to the next story where IntelBroker was arrested. And I'm not too familiar with IntelBroker. And as I go through the article, this person and this group has been around for a while doing things years back, right? One of them was the breach on DC HealthLink. Yeah, there's a number of other things that they mentioned in the article, but what I find interesting here, and even Cisco was part of some of their hacks, and even HPE, so Hewlett Packard, and what was their downfall? Essentially, the straw that broke the camel's back was how they accepted the money, because when they accepted the money, they requested it in Monero crypto for $2.467 million. And as I always say, I am not a crypto expert, right? But these transactions are recorded. And what they found out was,
Well, I'd say so Monero itself, I don't think it was on the payments of Monero. Monero itself is supposed to be a privacy coin. So unlike Bitcoin, where your wallets and your transactions are publicly available on the blockchain, Monero is not like that. And so I think the way they caught him was when he was trying to convert money or transfer money out of Monero into something that he could spend. I'm not sure if the article says it, but maybe through Coinbase. And
is this an IntelBroker or an initial access broker?
No, I think his online handle is IntelBroker. So I don't think this is the person actually going and doing the hacking, but you would then sell all the information that you get through these activities, and this person would then try to sell it and get money for it.
That makes sense. But here's the thing, right? So Monero, as you mentioned, is basically a privacy coin, and it's not open to the world like blockchain and Bitcoin is. But I'm so excited about, I would say this is probably a product of AI, just saying, because I know that as we are using artificial intelligence and more machine learning, smarter machines to figure out the complicated network and interwebs of that ledger, we're finally able to see where the money enters into the Monero coin and exactly where it exits. So as you mentioned, threat actors had been switching over to Monero for years to try to get away from the public ledger of blockchain and Bitcoin. And they hid under this, cloak of silence in Monero, and were able to continue to make this mass amount of money and then go somehow get it out into Bitcoin and change it into fiat. The thing that excites me about this article, really excites me, is I think we are getting closer to the point where all of these distributed ledgers can be figured out by, supercomputers and AI and law enforcement. That's going to be able to start helping us take down some of these really big, well-sophisticated, organized crime.
Yeah, I mean, gone are the days of suitcases full of cash, right? I think that's probably still the best way. Keep a bunch of cash under your bed, and no one can really trace it. Well, we hope. But yeah, these digital cryptocurrencies, where we thought, hey, we could easily send money back and forth and no one would know who we are. You'd have privacy, you'd have anonymity. It isn't turning out to be true anymore. So I don't know how that, if you can go backwards in time and now trace where, certain illegal funds have gone, that might be a concern for some people. Maybe a benefit now for, like you said, law enforcement.
Generative AI and AI in general is really good at summarizing large data sets. It's not great at everything. Trust me, if you've ever tried to generate an image on ChatGPT, you will see it's not great at everything. However, if you put a lot of data in there and ask it to summarize it or to follow the money, as an example, it's really good at that. So if you think about the scale that law enforcement has access to now in artificial intelligence and the data that they have, as you mentioned, Damien, from past transactions all the way through what we're seeing today on both the distributed ledger of blockchain, Bitcoin, and Monero, I think they can start finally putting together the puzzle pieces.
Yeah, and I think this is also showing how valuable, the privacy information, the private information that's available on the internet, how valuable that is. Because how much did you say, Fern? How much did they collect?
2.467, I believe, was the number.
And which is still kind of low. This is just one of many data brokers that might have illegal information on it.
Like, you think of if someone gave you $2.5 million, you could probably retire and live the rest of your life off of just the interest alone if you were happy with, $80,000 a year ish, right? So it's definitely a life-changing one. Yeah, 2.467 is what was requested, according to the Department of Justice in this article. So, yeah, I guess.
There's probably still a lot more stuck in Monero, right? Maybe this is just a fraction of what was being transferred out, and that's what got caught.
Tip of the iceberg, right? I guarantee it.
Yeah, there's probably like 50 or 100 million there, and he's just like, man, I need to go buy a cheeseburger, and just want to take 2.5 million now instead. Oopsies, which to me is crazy, but I guess so Monero is a coin that is essentially supposed to be private. So if you convert it to Monero, is it safe to say that no one knows how much you have? Or like, I guess what's the point of doing that versus just like a standard Bitcoin?
So in Bitcoin, the blockchain is public. So you can see all of the transactions in that public blockchain that's managed, right? It's just a distributed ledger that's managed by all of the miners. They do all the calculations to keep it in order, but that's all public. So you can at any time go back and see transactions to specific wallets. Within Monero, all of that's supposed to be private. And so you should not be able to see the actual transactions or even trace them back. I'm not an expert with Monero, but that's the selling feature of a privacy coin like that.
Yeah. And I remember when it came out, and I remember when we were saying, oh my God, here goes ransomware through the roof, because, before blockchain and Bitcoin was easier to track. It was public. And so before tumblers, I'll tell you what that is in a minute, but, we were really, able to keep our hands around it. But then Monero came up as private. That was like, oh, here we go. Now the threat actors can work with impunity and do what they want and, keep their money and their transactions private. So this is a little glimmer of hope that now these transactions are still traceable somehow. Even if they're encrypted, even if they're not signed the same way, you can follow the path from entry to exit. So Tumblr. Yeah.
I don't know in Monero if you'd be able to trace it inside once it's in Monero. But the problem with these cryptocurrencies is that unless it's Bitcoin, because you can pay for stuff in Bitcoin, I don't know how much Monero would be used as an actual currency. So yeah, in this case, you'd have to take it out, convert it to something that is spendable.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a Swiss bank account. Like if you were to convert, or think of it like in terms of like what people might associate to is like a Swiss bank account, where it's kind of there. It's tied to a person, but unless you have that number in the account, you don't necessarily know who it belongs to. So whatever goes.
No, but that you can, if you track back, you'd know what the account numbers are, and then you could eventually figure out who owns it. That's more like Bitcoin. The only problem is with Bitcoin, you can actually see all of the transactions in public. This would sort of be like buying some precious mineral that doesn't exist anywhere else, and there's not a lot of people that trade with it. So you'd have to go and convert it back into some cash to spend. That's the way I kind of look at it. But while it's in this system and it's this precious metal, nobody sees when the precious metal is being passed around from person to person.
Oh, I see. Okay, so that makes more sense. So it's a form of crypto that essentially is kind of like a black box that once it goes in, you don't necessarily know how much someone has in there until they kind of look to export it or take it out.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be watching this one because I want to see if they release any more details on how this person was actually caught. I'm sure they're not giving us the full story on the information that they have.
Yeah. So in the article, it says that they tracked to the crypto payment made to a Coinbase account linked to Kai West, who is the alleged.
There needs to be, to me, there needs to be more than that, right? That's just a transaction. But how to tie that transaction to the sale of this, this privacy data that was sitting on the dark web. But I haven't made that connection, so it'd be interesting to see.
Oh, okay.
But Troy, you're talking about tumblers for Bitcoin. So
yes,
let you finish.
Yeah. So a tumbler was something they used early on. They may not even exist anymore, but basically you take, let's say $100,000 in Bitcoin, And well, now that's one coin. So say $1 million in Bitcoin, and you run it through several different tumblers that take a fraction, hundreds of fractions of that Bitcoin and send it out to multiple thousands of wallets. And it goes through a system and it comes back together on the other side. Think of Mike TV from Willy Wonka, right? It starts over here and it gets broken up into a million little pieces, sent across the wire, and put back together on the far end. They keep they keep their commission for laundering the money, and you get clean money out the other end. So for a long time, that was how threat actors were able to, launder their money in Bitcoin. But then, computer systems and AI caught up, and were able to follow all those millions of transactions, no matter where they went, and put that story back together on the other end, and they figured that out. So that's no longer the case, and so Monero has become that privacy coin of choice. So it will be very interesting here. I'm not an expert on Monero, just saying, this is my opinion of the situation, but I can't wait to see what law enforcement is doing, and I hope threat actors are listening, and I hope this gives them pause for a moment.
Yeah, go back to the cash in the suitcase.
How about stop doing it? Let's do that.
Yeah, or take it to the casino, right? And then gamble it, and then hope you get a bunch of money and get a bunch of
honestly, that's how a lot of money is laundered, right? Through the casino, to be quite honest. So people.
Yeah, and there's so much technology there to look for that. It's amazing. They I don't want to get into the details, but they have a way to track every dollar that goes in and goes out, and they can see patterns and look for people who are doing just that. But yeah, people try to use the casinos to launder money, but what they don't realize is the amount of technology and eyes in the sky that are on every transaction in there.
Yeah, like how much money you're actually putting at play versus trying to cash out and claim as winnings. If it doesn't add up, it doesn't add up. It's all on camera, and all the transactions there are also logged, right? So hopefully it's getting more difficult for the bad guys to actually wash that money. What they thought was private money right now in cryptocurrencies is turning to be just easier to track. So yeah, if you're thinking about doing anything nefarious and collecting Bitcoin or collecting Monero, don't do it.
And as a Vegas local for over 15 years, I can tell you the casinos are actually the worst place to launder money. So if you're a criminal and you're thinking about coming to Vegas to try to wash the money, we have more cameras per capita than any other city in the U.S. And there's also computers that are now looking at every single transaction, every single bill that comes into a casino and that leaves the casino is, the numbers are scanned. They can tell you where that dollar came from and went through. So if you're thinking about laundering money in Vegas, you might as well go buy a laundromat or a car wash somewhere, because that's not a place to do it here.
You got a Walter White.
I've been watching. Yeah, I've been watching too much Breaking Bad.
I have not seen one episode of that show. How is it?
You got to watch Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Those are actually probably two really good shows. So highly recommend. But yes, part of that was he bought a laundromat
car wash. Yeah, car wash too.
So yeah, he bought a laundromat, and within the laundromat was actually the kitchen, if you will, the cooking section, like underneath a giant like dryer. It had like these hydraulic lifts that opened up, and you kind of go underneath it.
Don't give it away, Fern. He hasn't watched. Yeah. He's got to watch it.
I have not seen it. I feel very guilty about that because I've seen almost every other series. The Sopranos was my favorite. Game of Thrones, House of Dragon. Oh my God, Severance blows my mind. I love that show. How did I miss Breaking Bad? I think I was working somewhere very intently at that period of time and just missed it. But yeah, I got to see it.
Did you ever watch Casino with Al Pacino? Or no,
Joe Pesci. Yeah, absolutely.
Joe Pesci, right?
So I actually took Shannon to the casino house on the golf course because Mackenzie was playing, and we were in the backyard of the house that Sam Rothstein lived in, and the plane landed on the golf course. Well, that's Las Vegas golf club.
Oh, that was a real story. I mean, obviously, I know it's based on a true story, but that the plane landing with the agents that ran out of gas was a true story.
That's right, true story, and that was hole number 1, par 5.
Interesting. So it's currently streaming, I think, on HBO Max. For the longest time, my wife and I were watching like 80s and 90s crime movies with the Pacinos, the Robert De Niros, and a few other people. And that was one that was always paid for until within the last 2 weeks. So I think last weekend or the weekend before, we watched Casino. and I think it was like 3 hours long, maybe 4 hours long. Really good.
It's like 3. Yeah, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I didn't realize it, but there was a scene in there where they were talking about how the casino was being cheated when the dealers had to look at their cards at the blackjack table because of, they were seeing what they had. Like if there was an ace, they have to offer the insurance or whatever. And what I found interesting is, so I was talking to someone that actually knew the person that invented that little mirror at the blackjack tables. And what it told me was that every casino in the world pays the person that invented that 6 cents a day for that little mirror where they kind of slide the card into when there's an ace or a face card, which I thought was interesting because I'd be curious to know how much money the person that owns the patent for that little tool makes, because I mean,
it's probably a big amount. But there's a guy in town that I met, and I can't remember his name. I think his first name is Richard, but he invented Tito, which is ticket in, ticket out. And that's how you get a ticket in the machine, put your dollars in, you get a little ticket out that you go cash in. You imagine it used to be quarters you put in from the bucket and you get nickels out. This guy invented the ticket in, ticket out system, and he still lives here in Vegas. He's a technologist, inventor, and stuff like that. But can you imagine the royalties he's getting paid for those things? I mean, that's all over the world now. It's amazing.
Yeah, we're over here podcasting when we should be figuring out ways that casinos can improve their processes. Right. Well, I guess so that covered a lot of the stories around the first 3 things, right? So before it gets too late, before this gets too long, kind of want to jump into the next article, which is interesting because it's because of recent events, right? Where government officials are using WhatsApp as a form of communication, right? And I don't want to get into the specifics because I don't want to necessarily make it like this side or that side, but it's not the first time something like this has happened. And there were issues back in 2016 with email servers, right? We'll say that. And then now with specific military operations being discussed or Signal. And what I find interesting now is there is essentially a ban on WhatsApp, or will be in the near future, right? And
in the governmental phones or something like that, right? Not, there's not a ban on WhatsApp coming, folks. It's just government use cell phone.
You got to be clear, Fern. They're going to start a riot here. But yeah, I think I think this is a question would be for people who have businesses. Are you worried about your employees having communications out of band where you can't see their communications, or maybe it's through a unsanctioned application that's not approved? So that's a question for a lot of people. I know, Troy, you probably face this a lot. I face it a lot as well. It is a concern. I don't know what the right answer is.
Yeah, what you have to remember is the government is concerned about data leakage and things like that. And so as we use more and more technology to communicate, whether it's email or instant messaging, encrypted or not, I think that we, as a society and a government, are concerned about who has access to that data, the logs, and so on. So this is not surprising to me. But the question here is, how do we translate that into the enterprise? What are you using for instant messaging? Do you allow WhatsApp? Do you not allow WhatsApp? Do you have other tools? I can tell you that, in my past roles, different companies have looked at it with a very fine lens. Should we allow it? We want to push everybody back to corporate communications like Teams or Zoom. And WhatsApp was always frowned upon. But in some cultures around the world, it's their method of communication. And so, especially in Latin America and Asia, WhatsApp is the go-to, method of choice to communicate. And so if you're not in that tool, at least from our sales team and our client teams, they would miss out on deals or communications.
It's no different than text messaging, right? So, I mean, most companies don't have visibility into SMS text messaging. Mm-hmm. So would you have to ban that as well? I mean, that's not encrypted, so that's probably even worse.
Yeah. Well, iMessage is encrypted, right?
iMessages, yeah. But if you're just doing a straight SMS text, that's not.
Okay. What about RCS? Is that encrypted?
I don't know. RCS, I think, is just probably more enhanced texting. I'm not sure, though.
Okay. I only asked because
ISPs, I mean, your providers might be able to still see it.
Mm-hmm. Which goes back to the whole theory about, we have threat actors in our ISPs. I mean, at least twice in the last 2 years, we have found out about threat actors in major global internet service providers or telecom providers. And so, do they have access to my text messages? Probably. So, is that information still safe? I don't know. And so, I think that we have to grapple with that. But as an enterprise, is anything safe for our communication? Should we be pushing people back to email and Teams, or is that flexibility and client expectation important enough to let your employees communicate off brand?
So I've kind of got like maybe an extrapolation of this entire topic, and it goes back to what's hot right now is agentic AI, right? So I want to kind of frame it in the lens of, if there are companies out there now that are focused on reducing the amount of input of the human element in favor of streamlining processes, right? Essentially what people are doing is they have to give up certain forms of information, right? So right now, if you wanted, you could have your agentic AI tools buy you tickets, set a reservation, do all kinds of these different things, right? And to me, I think the thing that I think of is like, banning an app is one thing, right? But if we're heading in the world of agentic AI, where there are tools that kind of take over the burden of the work that someone would do, they need access to certain types of information. And
I think this is I think you're going down a totally different rabbit hole, because we're just saying communications between humans right now. You're throwing in a whole different complexity, which we're not going to have time to talk about today. This is just straight, how do you communicate? Like, if we're coworkers, how do we communicate with each other? And is WhatsApp not available? Or how do I communicate with people outside of our organization if their means of communication is only WhatsApp, or that's convenient for them? You're telling me I can't communicate with that person? So we're only talking about person to person here. I think once you start to throw in AI or other tools and automation, it becomes a little more complex.
Yeah, and I think also, as you look at, policy and procedures, acceptable use policies about what you can share over text messages or WhatsApp and other forms of communication should be very clearly defined. No client information, no confidential restricted information should ever be put on those channels. But again, Damien, I think this is an enabler, and I don't think anybody's going to really change their approach based on recent news events about either regulation or the government taking action and not using it.
Yeah, I think here's the concern, right? If you have intellectual property and you have users communicating over WhatsApp and it's encrypted from the endpoint or from the device, how do you know that they're not leaking intellectual property through that mechanism?
100%. Or leaking it to the press. They're trying to take an email screenshot using WhatsApp to send it out to the latest journalist so they can get a hot story going. I mean, I've seen that. This is not just from my mind. I've actually seen cases where employees, take a picture of something and send it to the local journalist to get a rise in an article about it. So, absolutely. And I think that goes back to your, insider threat and your other, processes. But I think a good policy procedure is important here. And just knowing, employers should know that, that employees have access to these type of tools. They can take a screenshot, they can take a picture and send that. They can communicate confidential data, just between people. So it really hasn't changed anything from what we've been facing so far. But it does definitely raise the eyebrows and gives us thought to talk about it.
so what would you guys do? Like, if you were in an organization where a lot of people use WhatsApp for communication, would you kind of log it down, or require that they use like a?
I think most organizations will try to lock it down. And look, we keep mentioning WhatsApp. It's not just WhatsApp. It's Signal. It's Telegram. There's so many other tools, right? So it's I don't want people to think that this is just a problem with WhatsApp. I think it's communication strategy in general, and most organizations will try to just block them. Now, that's a challenge, though, right? We say information flows like water. If there's a way, it's going to flow. you can't stop water from leaking out through holes if you have them, and so you're just gonna be plugging holes forever. So I'm not sure what that exact answer is, but I do think that organizations need to look at their strategies and potentially address it, right? Either block it or have policies or coach the users to say, you can use it for basic communications, but make sure you don't send any files through it, or make sure you don't have sensitive conversations through those channels. I don't think there is a way to actually put DLP on an end-to-end encrypted chat application like that. I think there are maybe ways that are coming, but right now it's kind of difficult, especially if a lot of people are doing it from their mobile phones and not necessarily from their laptops.
And I did look into this for several companies to see if you could have an enterprise version of WhatsApp, so you could have some controls around your employees. There's not one, so there is a business account for WhatsApp, but it basically allows you to market through WhatsApp to people, so you can put in ads and send. But it is not a employee management, tracking system. So I think all of these are definitely end-to-end encrypted, and whatever your employees are putting in there, you're not going to be able to see it. So it comes back to trust and building trust and basically having policies. You can still find out that they sent something they shouldn't have when the other end or somebody leaks it back to you or it's found out. So there are ways. Yes, it's not good. You got to trust your employees and train them well.
Yeah, you would have to man in the middle it somehow, but I don't think there's a way to put a man in the middle of these. Or you'd have to analyze the data before it gets put into the application.
You could throw like an MDM on someone's personal device, and then hope that goes well. But I don't think most people that would have their own device would necessarily want a corporate application, right, on their personal device for MDM, where it would kind of keep track of.
Yeah, I'd be too worried of what the organization can see. Although, some of the MDMs are really good at isolating what business traffic is versus what personal traffic is. But as an individual, I'd be worried about it, right? I think 90% of people probably would be worried about putting that type of application on their personal mobile device.
Oh, for sure. Especially if looking, like, say, for example, they're looking for another job, right? You don't necessarily want to have some sort of device management on your personal phone while you're might be at a bathroom break looking for a new job in the stall, right? Got some funny stories about that I've heard, so figured I'd drop that. But okay, well, so yeah, like you said, Damien, and it's not necessarily WhatsApp specifically. It's more so just communication and how organizations kind of address DLP risk around the communications that people have with personal devices. And if they're not going to get a corporate assigned device where everything on that device is corporate specific, like, work related, I think there's a huge gap for a lot of these companies, right? But there's really no easy way to solve it based on what I'm hearing from both of you guys. So there's no way to fix it. We don't, I guess, necessarily have the recommendation as a way to get and solve for it, but we just want to at least cover it and make sure that people are aware of kind of what's going on in the local news, or not local news, in the current events with some of these applications for communication. So I guess, with that, we're kind of getting close to the time limits that we have here for the episode today. So covered a lot, right? I think my favorite story was the first one around SMB threats, because there's a lot of small businesses make up the economy. So it's good to see what this report has and some of the things that they kind of point out as some significant risk to organizations that are out there. So we'll have the link for that episode, or not for that episode. We'll have the link for that article in the episode. But like I always say at the very end is, any closing thoughts from either of you guys on some of the topics today?
No, just I think these are some great conversation pieces, and our whole goal here is to draw attention to them so that you can address your business risk properly. All right, so let us know what you think. Happy to answer any questions. drop the comments below in the video or send us an email.
Yeah, absolutely. And then my last comment will be around ethical hacking. Make sure you're not doing unethical hacking and drumming up business for your IT job, and continue to do the Hippocratic Oath for the folks you serve.
Don't do bad things. We'll just leave it at that.
Things. Yeah,
And
don't do bad things. That's a good one.
Don't do bad things. Don't do illegal things. Keep it on the up and up, and we'll see you next Monday for the next episode of the DTF Cyber Podcast. Till then, take care.